And we are officially on. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Today we have really interesting topic about accelerated discovery with AI, and we have as a guest Sean Crawford that he will tell a few words about himself a little bit later. Today with you, as always, me, Alexander Moskaluk. I have more than 20 years experience in IT and certified business analyst in business analysis, cybersecurity, and also SAFe PM, product owner, project manager. And we have Rainer.
Yes, good evening. Hi, Alexander. Nice to meet you again virtually, and yeah, I'm happy to be in this after work talk. We have an interesting topic today, but let me quickly introduce myself. So I'm the kind of host, or let's say the European VA Day is my brainchild, or the brainchild of Sabine Ostländer and myself. We have we have with our company Masventa, which is in the far west region of Germany. We have thought about, let's do an international conference in Germany for business analysts, and this we have done the first time in 2018, and even through Corona, we have finally had this conference in Frankfurt, and here you can see the event, the fourth one, which has happened in 2023. But this time we have decided to go fully virtual to get people like you, Alexander, on board, and you, Sean, very far away, easily from Canada, Australia, everywhere. So the business analysis day really goes global. It's more than European, but of course we are in Europe. We have been found, or we have founded the European BA Day in Germany. So the fifth one, we always had interesting mottos and themes. And the fifth one is about artificial intelligence. And normally, business analysts they are kind of grounded, so they do not believe that quickly in new technologies. But I have to say, AI is really influencing all of us a lot. It is going through our work. It is helping us. It is making our work easier, and sometimes it's tricking us. So sometimes we think we can believe the AI, and then we have to question again and again, and then it turns out that it's probably better to back it up by let's say experienced human beings. But this is exactly the tension field we are in. Is it AI or is it a human being? And so from my point of view, let me quickly give you a short history. I'm in IT more than 30 years. I'm normally doing a lot of project management, but my passion is business analysis. And always in all my projects, it's always about requirements, requirements, requirements. And yeah, saying this word like Steve Ballmer always says, developers, developers, developers. I'm handing over to Sean, and I'm really curious what he has to say. And yeah, happy to hand over to you. Stage is yours, Sean.
Thank you, Rainer. Thanks as well, Alexander, for inviting me on. I'm really excited to be here. So, yeah, I've been a business analyst for a little bit over 15 years now. The last 8 and a bit at EPAM Systems. Um, and I've been spending the last year or so working a lot with the generative AI and what we can do with it in the business analysis space. So excited to cover that topic. And also, to your point, Rainer, I was a skeptic of new technology when AI first hit the scene last year. Well, in a big way last year, I should say. But I've kind of made the journey over to being an advocate for it, for what we do, and for the future of the IT industry. So that probably is also something we can touch on today. Might be interesting to people to hear.
Sure. So, Rainer?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I have used ChatGPT and other tools a lot in the last months. Sometimes, um, I mean, I'm actually a lazy guy, and sometimes if I have to write standard things, then I'm just using ChatGPT. I was preparing some role descriptions for business analysts in a special area in the energy industry, and I have put together some facts and I have fed it into ChatGPT, and 5 minutes later I had a perfectly formulated role description. So why doing everything on your own if you just have to feed the systems with the right input, and then they help you a lot. But the point is, of course, can you really publish what you get from these systems, or do you need to adapt it and to refine it? And normally, I do not take what I'm getting from ChatGPT one to one. I'm working on it and I'm refining it, and only then I'm doing it. So the final stamp will be my own stamp and not GPT.
I totally support Rainer. And let's make a small pause here, discussing options about using AI and different AI tools. And we should mention our sponsors of the conference. So we have two sponsors. You can see them on the screen. And now let's go back while you see the announcement of the conference. Sean, I know that you took part in creation this EPAM DIL. So
Yeah.
can you? Mhm.
So before I kind of talk about that, let me just step back a little bit. For anybody who doesn't know EPAM particularly well, it's relevant to where this tool came from to know that we're a large systems integrator and software delivery company. And we've been really successful over the years. A lot of companies kind of refer to us as a developer's developer, so more in the engineering realm than elsewhere. But we also obviously work directly with our customers. And one of the things that I think I can say for myself, and I would say for most EPAMers, we gravitate towards innovation type projects. That's where we are find things most interesting. I guess, as a company, which is why AI coming on the scene was such a big deal, because it led to a very interesting question, kind of to Rainer's point of, okay, AI is here, but can we actually be better? Can we actually be more efficient with it? So that's that question, that one question of can a BA be better by using AI, was where a whole set of initiatives started. This was just one of them. Um, and so myself and EPAM BAs from around the world, um, Switzerland, Mexico, I think we had a couple people in the Middle East join us, all working on different initiatives. And the accelerated discovery that I shared with you, Alexander, is one of those initiatives, or started out as one of those initiatives. The general idea being that, to the point of why would I rewrite something that's basically the same every time? Can we gain efficiency in the drafting phase um, of these activities, right? So let me kind of fast forward to what we needed in order to do that, because it comes in two parts. The first part is something we call EPAM Dial, which is an open source solution now. You can actually find it. I think it's dial.epam.com if you're interested. But it's I'm going to use the wrong word because it escapes me right now, but it's a coordinator, basically. You can connect to a range of different generative AI LLMs using Dial. So you can use ChatGPT, which is what I most commonly use, but you can also use, or GPT-4, I should say. You can also use Llama is on there, and a bunch of other ones are on there. So you can compare different LLMs and their outputs, among other things. It also creates a secure layer. So the internal one that I use for most of my work stays within the EPAM environment. So if if I put a company's name and logo and a project suggestion they have into our instance of Dial, it doesn't go outside of the EPAM environment to protect intellectual property and security and all that type of stuff. So it's a really great tool in that sense. You both get to do comparisons between different LLMs, and you also get all the security you need so that you aren't afraid of trying new things and intellectual property leaking out. So that was
Which
tool
is
number one.
extremely important in
Yes.
now at times of AI, because many people just feed their questions into the generative AI tools, and then you never know where the data is going to. And in some companies, it's forbidden. You cannot do
Mhm.
it for these reasons. Some companies, some bigger companies, they have their own, let's say, closed, secure circle of AI engines. But in other companies, the web URLs are completely closed. You cannot use it,
Yeah.
and that's very important, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say that there's an entire engineering team at EPAM that's working on Dial. They're still updating it and stuff. I just saw some of the updates they made to it this morning. So they're doing brilliant work to make it easier for us BAs and other people to use. So I don't want to steal their thunder. If you want, I'll track down some names so you can talk to them. But the long and the short of that is it created a platform in which we could try a lot of things that we wouldn't have been able to try otherwise. So that's kind of where we started. And then one of the features they built into it was the ability to save and also to parameterize prompts. For anybody who's not familiar with the concept of prompt engineering, you write a prompt, you save it for repeatable use. One of the great things that Dial has built right into it is you can have your personal prompt library, which is now shareable. And with your personal prompt library, you can then parameterize your prompts so you can make a general prompt that can be applied to a bunch of different instances and situations. So what we then did was I wrote a series of prompts as just a proof of concept internally. Can we be better with generative AI? Let me try it out. And that was the initial version. And at the time, it wasn't called accelerated discovery. It was just called assisted discovery, with the idea being it just helps you get started. So that's the start of the story for the what is now accelerated discovery. Where that came, I mentioned off the top kind of EPAM's innovation mindset. So when I did my first version of this, I was given a great opportunity to show it around to a bunch of people. And a couple people, one of our account managers, Robert Burke, who I'm sure you can find on LinkedIn, and one of our principal consultants, Eric Benton, who I know you can find on LinkedIn, caught wind of it. And they asked me to come along to help them with developing as a concept for one of our insurance leads, one of our insurance customers. So we spent a lot of time working with them and going back and forth. And that result of that engagement or that effort was what is now the accelerated discovery. So I'm not going to go into it in exacting detail, but what it ultimately boils down to, it's a set of 6 carefully tested and engineered prompts that we use for it for a variety of different circumstances. And they're all parameterized, so we can take them with us to any customer that we want to work with or any project we want to do. We work with it to give it an initial scope. So you want to deliver a mobile application or insurance claims, or you want to create a application process to create a loan, whatever, it doesn't matter. You just give it some parameters. And then through working through it, what it'll eventually do is it'll give you an initial outline of the potential scope that project might consider. And to your point, Rainer, the first thing the BA gets to do is look at this potential scope and say, that's good, that's not, I like that idea, let's toss it to this. And it's a lot of, but what it accelerates you into, and that's where the name comes from, is instead of spending a lot of time taking notes and then going back and reviewing them, consolidating them, bringing them into ideas and figuring out, and then finally doing analysis, like a week later, you get a first draft really, really fast. And then you immediately dive into analyzing it. And for us as EPAM, what's great about that is we can do that stage with a customer much more quickly than we would have been able to do otherwise. And then from that, we can dive further into, I'm a big fan of agile product management. So we break the scope it down, gives us down to epics and then features and then stories. And it'll even go so far as to write at a story level acceptance criteria and all that type of stuff, and you can identify edge cases and gaps and requirements and that sort of thing. And in the span of a few days of working with an AI or with the generative AI, and then consulting with your client or coworkers or whatever the case may be, depending on the project, you can actually draft a first version of a agile project backlog. Well, I'll give the example that I like to quote. We applied this with a customer, or at least the principles of it with a customer. It was a different set of prompt, but the same idea. We generated 100 user story backlog with acceptance criteria, assumptions, risks, dependencies all identified in the span of about 2 days, which
Cool.
was
So what?
done. So go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry, I interrupted you. But I'm really curious. So how did you manage the hierarchy? Because normally, if I come from let's say the business analysis theory, I would say business requirements, stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, things like that. But if I now change my language, and if I speak agile, and I say what is about the epics, and underneath you have some business user stories, then you're breaking them down into tasks finally, or whatever. And so so if you say we have a backlog of 100 user stories, then it sounds to me a little bit like solution oriented user stories, or is this really business user stories? Maybe you can elaborate a bit on. I'm coming from the top level, from where I ask questions like why and what, and only then I'm going to the how, and I would like to know how this can be supported by AI.
So that's a really good question. In the example that I just gave, one of the things that we do is we enable or encourage, I guess is, okay, so let me take a step back. The first thing you have to accept from this concept is what you're really doing is leveraging AI's tendency to hallucinate, right? You're trying to get it to make things that make up suggestions, for lack of a better way to put it, that then provide guidance toward a business goal. So what you're starting out with a business goal that you want it to satisfy is really the key thing here. So when we outline the initial project scope, we'll give it, for example, 4 or 5, 6 bullet points of, I want to deliver this application to this market with these constraints. This is in scope, this is out of scope, that sort of thing, right? And just at a very high level. One of the things we can also do with this tool is we can also extrapolate additional suggestions for scope. And by that, I mean, so let's assume, I can't think of a big European company off the top of my head, but it doesn't matter. Let's assume we're working with Mercedes-Benz. I'll just pick a car manufacturer. And they want to develop an application to monitor the health of your car. So you start with that, and then you're probably going to have a few things like monitor engine health, monitor maintenance schedules, stuff like that. Then what you can do is go, okay, as this application evolves over time, this company has objectives they want to solve. So let me go into those objectives and add that into what my generation is and see what additional suggestions it comes up with. And that gives you a very comprehensive, long-term, and very high-level scope. So that would be your epics are being created at that point. Now, the epics might be something like, depending on how you word the input, it might be something along the lines of, the initial application is just for monitoring service schedule and warranty and recalls. I'm not sure all this terminology is the same for North America and Europe, but that's how I would think of it.
More or less, yes.
Yeah. So there's a fine example of how you could do that. Then when you extrapolate out, it'll give you additional lower priorities of epics, like Maybe you want to build in a component to purchase accessories for your vehicle. So you have a shop in there. Maybe you want to build in a component that allows people to see when the next model is coming when their car is 5 years or 10 years old. Or maybe you want to build in a personalization component where, depending on how much driving you do and so on and so forth, it gives you different information to maintain your vehicle, stuff like that. So that would give you some lower priority epics. And now you have that comprehensive high level scope. Now, what you haven't done here, and this is where I promise I'm getting back to your question, you haven't spoken to a business stakeholder through any of that. And there's two sides to that. It's a very much double-edged sword. On the one hand, you have accomplished creating a high-level scope for a project off very minimal information with no access to a business stakeholder, which anybody who's been especially for a company like EPAM, where we have clients and business stakeholders are very busy and we can't always get access to them for extended periods of time, you can see there's a benefit there because I have something to bring to them. And the way I like to look at it is, instead of coming to them with a blank slate of what do you want, I'm going to come to you with, here's 20 different features that I've suggested here and outlined for you. Which ones match to your vision? And let's take this one from, you like the initial application, you like the shop that I mentioned, you like the personalization. That's what you want to have the core of your project as. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for your time. Let me go back and flesh these out. And then now you have the business stakeholder has identified what their goals are, and you can start turning those into features, right? So again, using agile product management as your primary kind of guidance here, that's how I built this tool. You end up with, okay, so the maintenance component, what's my regularly scheduled maintenance, and on what frequency? What is some irregular maintenance that might be recommended? Like here in Canada, winter tires is a good example of something that we do. Tire switch over twice a year, so keeping
as
track
well in
of
Germany.
that. Yeah, exactly. So you keep track of those things and so on and so forth, and start building out a set of features that go under each of those epics. And now you're starting to build a hierarchy, right? So then once you have,
let me quickly jump in. Sorry, but I'm very much interested in the backbone, in the structure you need to have to build these hierarchies around requirements. You said epics, features, user stories. I think then we have tasks. So how does the AI learn it from you? How do you feed this fundamental structures into the system?
So that's part of how the prompt engineering works. For lack of or for a not more simplistic way to describe it, the way the prompts are engineered is to, now granted, one thing I should emphasize, this is all customizable. So we also would customize it to a given environment, given client, given project, however, whomever was executing wants it to be done. But at a very high level and very generic point of view, the first set of prompts are all providing an epic level description. And the way that we frame that is we give it what we want an epic to be. So as an outline, as part of the prompt, it explains to the AI that define for me a set of epics. Those epics need to meet XYZ requirement, and those requirements might be something inconsistent with product management methodologies. An epic might be something that should be able to be delivered in one PI or one, let's use a safe term or something like that. And we can define that for each individual customer, however they want to do it. And then when we step down to the feature level, that's where we go and say, okay, a feature needs to be deliverable within reason, within say 2 to 3 sprints. Now, what's critical about this, and it's the question that I imagine you have waiting in your head, is we're not actually dictating to the AI how much can be done in a PI or in a sprint or whatever. We're just giving it a general guidance. And the reason for the general guidance, instead of a specific level, though in theory it is certainly possible to be more specific, and I can talk about that a little bit, but the reason that we generalize it in this instance is to make it easy for us to bring it to a customer and customize for it, right? So in essence, if we made it too prescriptive at this stage, then we'd be going to our clients in the example I just gave, we'd be going to Mercedes-Benz and saying, this is how you have to run this. And I don't imagine they'd be particularly pleased with us if we did that, right?
This won't work, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what we'll go to them and say, here's an example of how this could. Now, how would you like us to apply it to your environment, right? Because here we can just give you a high level breakdown, show you quickly an example, and now we can work with you to make it specific to you.
Yeah, even that companies are using a common language if it comes to agile development, or if it comes to branches, industries. Each company has its own language,
Exactly.
its own semantics, and if you cannot bring them the things with their semantics, then they will probably not jump on that train.
Well, absolutely. And one of the things EPAM is really focused on is our client success, right? So we don't want them to adapt to us. We want to adapt to and work with them, right? So, you know, I've worked with half a dozen clients for EPAM over the last 8 years, something like that. And each one, to your point, has a slightly different variation on how they do things. And the thing is, we also work across vertical, right? So that's another reason for this generic terminology in this tool, because it's vertically agnostic. We refined it for an insurance provider here in Canada, but the idea always was that it doesn't matter if it's a car manufacturer, an insurance provider, a major financial institution, a tech firm, a manufacturing company. The idea is still the same. The principles are still the same. And that's kind of the way I look at business analysis in general. All the principles are consistent, but the terminology in a given domain or at a given company needs to be tweaked a little bit. The efforts need to be adjusted, and this tool accommodates for
that. I'm sorry, Alexander, go ahead.
Yeah, go. So I'm more curious about context, because it will work for more or less standard tasks and standard features. But when we're talking about context, and for example, we're building some existing system, or if there is a request from some special domain or something like this. So how do you train your models to accommodate these questions or context?
That's a very good question. There's a two-part answer to this. So let me kind of break down. For starters, the general accelerated discovery is not trained specifically for any domain. And what I mean by that is it can be run against, say, just standard GPT-4, and it will function. And it recognizes important business analysis terminology. So like if you ask it for Gherkin format acceptance criteria, it knows what that means, right? Or if you ask for, can you produce edge cases, corner cases for me on this particular, it understands what that means. So at a generic level, you don't actually need any specific fine tuning or training of the model. Now, and I touched on this very, very briefly when I said, in theory, you can be more specific. So there's plenty of examples where, to your point, it's going to be very specific to the project, to the technology, to the industry. So I'll give one example. Let's say it's a life sciences project or a pharmaceutical project or something like that. They obviously have a lot of IP that they want to protect. They've spent a lot of money on that. They don't want to risk exposure for obvious reasons. And in order to benefit from a tool like this, it doesn't know much about their internal environment. Therefore, the benefit goes down a little bit. Now, in terms of generic IT projects, it doesn't matter if it's a pharmaceutical company or a bank. Like, the principles there are fine, but it's when you get into their more specifics that you have to worry about. So in that, you can fine tune and embed, and EPAM has done this for clients, where you can embed like a Confluence type knowledge base as part of the model, so that it has that background information internal to your environment and executes with that. I haven't personally been involved in any of those projects, so I wouldn't be able to explain exactly how it works. I apologize. But I do know that we have done that, where we've used project documentation or even project code bases to help the model have a better understanding so that, and as an example, one other thing that can be done is you can query a code base in English language, in general language, and get a general language response, which helps business analysts, obviously, because then you don't need a developer to explain what that block of code is. So that's helpful in that sense. This tool doesn't do that. Again, it's more of a starting point tool than a specific case where you would do something like that, where you would have it learn and bring it in. But even with that, my most recent success with this particular project was particular tool, sorry, was extremely esoteric, for lack of a better word. Very, very niche, I guess is a better way to put it. And we didn't need to do any specific training of the model or anything like that. We just still used a generic model, and what we fed into it was a summary of the technology stack. So, we're using this Microsoft component, this cloud platform, so on and so on. Hi, Daniel. I recognize that name. So we can use various components and stuff like that to build guardrails in, for lack of a better way to put it, so that it knows roughly what can and can't happen. And you can also give it guidance to, and this is where you have to be very clever with your prompt engineering, to give it constraints. So as an example, if you generically say, write me a user story write me a project or project backlog for an e-commerce project, you're going to get a pile of not very useful, just
but very standard, yeah. But
yeah,
very standard features, yeah.
Yeah, very, very, very standard, very, very basic, very, very, and not particularly useful because it's not going to cover anything particularly nuanced about your project, right? Whereas if you say, I'm starting from an on-premise e-commerce solution using this and this front end, this back end, just fill it in with whatever you want. And I'm migrating to this cloud platform with this back end and this front end and this architecture style, it actually does understand all of that. And you can and then you'll get something meaningful, right? So a lot of it comes down to, for this particular application, prompt engineering. And what we did was we wrote the prompts to surround the information that you need to give it, and then it joins, then it puts your information into that prompt and generates the information that you're looking for. And I saw there was a question from Daniel in the chat there about Dial and its ability to use RAG. Yes, it can, to answer that question.
I have a very common question to you. It's a bit provocating. Are the solutions, or let's say, are the answers, the results from the AI better for technical challenges than for business challenges?
That's a good question. Yes is the answer. It depends. It's highly dependent. I'm being a bit facetious. I apologize, but it's highly dependent on the situation. So what I found, where it becomes truly powerful. Now, I think it's valuable in this sense to describe my own background. So I come from a fairly strong technical background. I went to a technical college. I learned to write code in 6 or 7 different programming languages and stuff like that. I was never particularly good at write. I would never refer to myself as a developer because I wasn't even close to what the most junior developer can do. But I learned how code works and how that happened. And the reason that's relevant, as well as the fact that I learned a little bit about electrical engineering and that sort of thing in that school, is that it gives me the background to make a better evaluation of questions like that when I'm looking at the output. Mm-hmm. So my view of that is to say, if you already have that background, then it does give you useful insights. If you don't have that background, probably it's not going to give you anything overly useful from a technical standpoint because you're not going to be able to evaluate. And going back to what I said earlier, what you're really doing here um, is driving the AI into a hallucination. And for anybody who's not familiar with what I mean by that terminology, hallucination is what all the very smart data scientists and AI engineers and all those people refer to when the AI basically makes something up. So the example I use is ChatGPT. If you just use the public one, is basically like talking to a 12-year-old who has a perfect memory of an incredible amount of information, whose only priority is to answer your question. So it's just going to give you an answer that sounds good. Whether it's accurate or not, that's why they have that little warning down at the bottom that says, please verify this information, because it cares to answer your question. Now, it's more complicated than that, of course, and I'm being, again, slightly facetious. And it's an amazing piece of technology. So don't take from what I just said that it's not usable or anything like that. But it's important to understand that. And in this particular case, what we're trying to do is leverage that. So I think the underlying theme, sorry, here is if you know how, like, okay, you, Rainer, I think you said about 30 plus years of IT experience. Alexander, you said about 20 plus years. I'm about 15 plus years. If any one of us looked at the output that it's giving us because of our backgrounds, because of the knowledge we have, we'd be able to look at that. And because we know we're making it, we know we're trying to get it to do, we'd be able to evaluate it and say, some of this is good and some of this is bad. And the ultimate answer to your question is when we use this on a practical application for a real project, what I would say, and I've asked developers at EPAM and other and QA and other disciplines to weigh in on this, and we have rough agreement on it. You come up with user stories and you come up with requirements that are about 70% of the way there. So it's very good and very clear for the most part what the business needs and how it would need to function. Or sorry, more accurately, what it would need to accomplish to be considered functional. And there may be some level of guidance about how it would work. But if you wanted to write the exact architecture, that's a different discipline that you would need to bring in. Now it's doable. I'm not saying it's not. But this particular application will focus more on what needs to be accomplished with a little bit of how, whereas an architecture or developer's application would come from the opposite direction, be more about how you accomplish the what. So that's kind of my view of where this sits in that hierarchy. It's very interesting because you can see the different aspects and the different disciplines of software delivery, for example, all have, in my view at least, use cases for generative AI. The one thing I will say for me, and this is a real practical example, we executed a project in which I used a variation on this tool that we're talking about to help me draft the backlog. And what I realized while I was doing that is there's a big gap here in these requirements, because this set of requirements over here and this set of requirements over here, there's something that's supposed to be going between those, but that's nowhere in. And that particular application was working off requirements that the client provided and said, this is exactly what we want delivered. Don't ask questions. And then we said, well, can we ask a few questions about this hole in the middle that you seem to have missed, please? Because I don't think it's going to do what you want it to do if we just do what you've given us here. And that actually was a huge benefit to us because it saved us. We probably wouldn't have noticed it if we weren't able to draft the stories and the backlog so quickly. And then it saved us and the client a ton of money to go back and rework it to figure out how to fill this gap that nobody had noticed. Because normally, in my experience at least, when you're doing an agile project and you start with a priori scope and then you find a gap towards the end, like, why isn't that here? Well, you're sure you can pivot and you can build it, but it's going to cost money. So let's find those things earlier, and then we don't have that problem anymore.
So can I simply say that this is a massive accelerator?
Hence the name. Absolutely. Yeah, accelerated discovery. That's what we call it. That's what we termed it, and that's exactly what it is. It saves so much time in the initial drafting, and frees the business analyst up to do what I think most business analysts enjoy doing, which is the actual analysis work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you guys, but I can write user stories or BRDs or whatever version of documentation you want all day long. I've been doing it long enough. It's not the fun part of my job. The fun part of my job is looking at that and going, okay, how is this actually all going to fit together? Where are my gaps? Where are my conflicts? Who do I need to talk to? And sorting through all that type of stuff. And this tool helps free up that time.
Today I'm giving a course here in Hamburg. I'm in Hamburg actually,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm doing again a business analysis course in the energy industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm always confronted with is the collaboration between product owners and business analysts. So what are business analysts doing in agile teams? How can BAs help POs? Do POs need BAs for help? Do they need to form a PO team and things like that?
Yeah.
Is a PO only a part-time PO because he is very busy in the business and he has a dilemma that he cannot spend all his time on prioritizing things? And now let's quickly do a quick journey or quick um, change of perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So if a PO from his let's say most important tasks. The PO
Mm-hmm.
is the voice of the customer. The
Yeah.
PO needs to prioritize the product backlog. He needs to prioritize the epics and the high level things. Um, is a PO benefiting from the solution in the same way a BA does? Is it completely identical, or is there anything which is different? Let me put one word into the room: delivering value to the
Mm-hmm.
business.
So that is a very good question. Um, the short answer is the experience identical? The short answer should be no. Now I say should be because what I've experienced over the years indicates to me that they're often, depending on the different structure of an organization and so on and so forth, there's often a lot of
Mm.
crossover between the BA and the PO. So it'll vary depending on the situation. But let's take just a strict view of it for a moment. The PO as the voice of the customer,
Mm.
um, and the input as to I would like to accomplish whatever, this feature or this epic or this capability. Probably not even described in that way. I want this capability is really what they're saying to
Yeah,
you,
yeah. More
right?
capability level, yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Um, Now, a particularly experienced and well-versed PO might say, I see these epics or I see these features to enable that capability. What do you think? You might get
Mm.
that, but you might not as well. So, where that becomes interesting is, and this tool can benefit them. It's actually why it's broken down into the 6 stages. So let me just briefly explain what the 6 stages are. The initial stage, what is termed the initiation prompt, is all you need for that is a domain, like a domain of business, so insurance, financial, retail, whatever. A bullet point project description of the type of capabilities that you would like to enable, and it also asks you for a capability level of basically a self-evaluation of your own knowledge, which it then calibrates what the output is, so that it's not going to tell somebody who's never worked in the insurance industry before a specific regulation or something like that that they wouldn't recognize. It's going to get more generic terminology. That's and that phase is akin to the initial conversation between a PO and a BA, if you will, because what it's going to then respond with is, okay, given the description of what you want to accomplish, here are some things that you should research. So take the example of I want to make a mobile auction application. So the things it's likely to come back with is like, okay, research auction regulations to make sure you're going to comply with them. Research online sales and how that works from a like what are the regulatory frameworks you have to apply to you and what you're doing. It's going to come up with say 4 or 5. research topics. Then it's also going to come up with investigations that you need to perform in order to enable this for your organization. So how do you do it now? What are the constraints that you have on it in your organization? Is it doesn't even exist? Do you have business processes to support it? All that type of stuff. So that I think everybody's probably already recognizing, anybody who's been a BA for long enough is recognized this phase is very much like, okay, product owner comes to BA with idea, lead or highly senior BA will say to them, okay, I get your idea, I understand the concept, I need to do some research on this and this and this and this, I need to talk to some people about this and this and this and this, and we can flesh out what you're asking for, right? So it's doing that initial part for you. Now, the reason I bring this up in answer to your question is you can envision that part being handled by a product owner, and not necessarily having to go to a BA who's experienced project delivery and say, okay, Mr. Generative AI or Mrs. Generative AI or whatever you call it, this is my project. What are some of the things I'm going to need to look into to save me time when I have a person-to-person conversation later? And it'll give you the topics, right? So you can see where the benefit is. It's not the same. And I would say if I was going to shift the accelerated discovery that is there today on the EPAM Solution Hub, to be more product owner focused, I would probably take it a step to the left, I guess, because I'm gesturing that way, to bring it more into the product ownership sphere. So what I would probably want to do in a case like that is write some precursor prompts if I was going to do it a solution like this, that are to the effect of, okay, what are the drivers for what you're doing? So is it analytical driven? And if so, what are the analytics, right? So I've worked in a lot of domains, but I'm going to use the retail one for this example. If you're working on an e-commerce site, you generally speaking will have tons and tons and tons of statistics and analytical data that tell you how efficient your site is, right? And good product owners are going to look at that data and say, in the sales funnel, there's a problem at people are adding things to the cart, but they're never going to the cart, as an example. Hopefully that's not happening to you on your e-commerce site, but just as an example. If that's the case and you have the analytical data behind it, what you could do is take a step further up the chain and go, okay, I have this analytical data, give me a set of ideas that I can vet that might move the needle positively to resolve this issue. What are the blockers that I could potentially remove? What are the capabilities I could potentially add to my e-commerce platform to make sales conversions better? Now, again, you're kind of leaning into hallucination a little bit. Like there are some principles that it's going to probably use just generically that say, well, remove blockers from the add to cart to the purchase. So replace add to cart with buy now might be a suggestion it comes up with, which I don't think any product owner really needs an AI to tell them. But it will also come up with some other suggestions that you probably wouldn't have thought of that you can then flesh out and continue down the pipeline into potentially being a project, right? So it's all about framing the experience, and depending on the frame that you want to put on it, you're going to have a different set of requests that you're going to want to work through. And in theory, at least, it should be possible at some point where if you think about every artifact that gets created over the life cycle of a project, so right from the initial ideation, project charters, and all that stuff, all the way down to test cases and all that, from beginning to end, and final acceptance and UAT plans and all that type of stuff. It should be possible, given some very clever prompt engineering, that you could have a first draft end-to-end of absolutely everything with the support of AI. Some of it's going to be like I said, with user stories, some of it's going to be 70% of the way there. Some of it's going to be 90% of the way there because they're repeatable, like a project charter, for example. It's high level. It's not wrong if it's like a little vague. So it's going to be closer to 90% of the way there if you draft it with AI, and then you're just going to have to edit it. And maybe some of the more complex test cases and development related tasks, unit tests and actual code are maybe going to be like 30 or 40% of the way there. But in theory, you can go end to end and have first drafts of everything using an AI lens. This particular example
That
of the
sounds
accelerated
fantastic.
discovery. Yeah.
It sounds fantastic. I really have to say that I'm often asked by IBAs how can I get rid of this let's say work which I have to which has to be done in masses. So I'm working on 100 requirements. I have 160 today. I heard I have 160 user stories in the backlog. They need to be refined and things like that. So so let me ask one question just as a thesis. So you have the PO coming out of the business. The PO is the voice of the customer. The PO has the problem that he is probably a part-time PO. As I said before, he is working a lot in the business and he has only a slice of his time to work on the project. And then he or she needs some BAs to support him to do the work on the backlog, on analyzing the user stories, on refining the things. And so if I'm a PO, and if I have 2 or 3 business analysts and we form all together a PO team, and then suddenly AI comes in, I only need 1 or 1.5 rather than 3.
So I'm going to say no to that. And I'm gonna give you a somewhat odd answer, or at least it's going to seem odd to start with to your question. So I started off as severely a skeptic in the realm of generative AI and its utility for business analysis or anything else for that matter. And the reason I did that, I started very, very skeptical of it, is among other things, one of the most important functions of a business analyst, in my personal view, is the ability to stand by and defend the requirements that have been written so that I understand what the business asked for. I understand why this is structured the way it is. I understand what this ask is, and this is the requirement, and these are all the traceable reasons why. And you don't get to change it just because you don't like it, type of thing, right? That's a very important function of the business analyst. And my view was, and I remember having a conversation with one of EPAM's vice presidents last year when he was here in our office in Kitchener about stuff like this. Is like, well, how are you? He asked me, how are you supposed to stand by what it says? And I didn't have a good answer at the time. So thankfully, I've evolved since then. So what I did, instead of start applying it in a business sense first, I applied it in my personal life first. And to do that, I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons, for anybody who's familiar with that old game with books and dice. And I still play Dungeons and Dragons today, and I run Dungeons and Dragons games for my friends. So I was like, you know what? There's no risk to me trying to use ChatGPT to help me do that, because if I get it wrong, I get it wrong. No one's going to be mad at me. I'll figure it out. It's fine. So I did. That's how I started working with generative AI. And what I rapidly found was it couldn't replace me as the person running the game, because it still took that human intuition, if you will, to make the game fun and to make decisions that would keep things moving forward in a positive and good sense for the players. But what it did do is alleviate a huge percentage of my mental burden for figuring out, okay, there's a rule for this situation. I got to remember what book it's in, and I got to find it, and I got to read it, and then I got to interpret it. And so something as simple as, what is the rule for this situation? It spit out an answer, and I would go with it and make an interpretation and go with it. I then learned that it wasn't always giving an accurate answer, so I had to figure out how to actually get it to give me an accurate answer every time. So that's where I developed a lot of the principles that went into my business experience, but it was still a person that was required to make it work. What it does is it gives you predictions, and then you have to make a decision based on it. So that was where I started journeying away from skeptic and toward advocate. And when we talk about the example that you just gave, it's actually very, very similar. I know it doesn't sound it at first, but if you think about it, let's say that you want to execute 4 or 5 projects with that PO who has limited time. Okay. Can you then take a tool like what we've been talking about with the accelerated discovery and reduce the support team, the BA team, down to one, maybe one and a half full-time equivalent BAs, and accomplish the same amount of work? The answer to that question is almost entirely no. What you can do though is if each of those BAs is an expert on their individual projects, you can get better quality projects because
Cool.
they can use the AI to do that not very interesting manual. Oh, I have a template for what a user story should look like. So I just copy, paste, I fill it in, blah, blah, and move on to the next one. The AI can do that. You don't need a BA who, generally speaking, I don't know how it is in Germany, but generally speaking, BAs are expensive resources for projects to employ. So having them basically be typists is not the best use of your money.
Waste of money.
But if you can have the AI be the typist and the BA uses their analytical skills to make decisions and to make recommendations and to find conflicts and resolve issues, and you alleviate burden from the product owner because now the BA actually has more time to take what they've given them and do more of that work that often product owners have to help with because they know the business stakeholders and so on and so forth. But the BA can also do that once they have the requirements clear. So, that gives the BA a lot more strength, a lot more ability to do what BAs are good at, which is to solve the problems of the project, to analyze what the desired outcome and make sure that the scope is actually going to fit. So my answer is no, you don't reduce your staff. Your staff becomes better.
Super interesting.
I have one question. What about integration with other tools like diagramming tools, etc.? Because from my experience, it takes a lot of time just converting requirements in different formats,
Mhm.
and describing them in using different formats.
So cognizant of time, I'm going to give a really quick answer to this one. It's certainly doable. And it's funny, I mentioned the team of BAs around the world who worked on this last year. If I assuming I recognize it correctly, Daniel, who's in the chat there, was one of those BAs who worked on it over the years, and that was actually something that he specifically worked on. So you have the right guy in this audience who knows a lot about that. But it's certainly doable. What the accelerated discovery is intentionally generic, so it doesn't dovetail exactly to any one tool. It works really well with Jira and Confluence because it uses the same markdown language for formatting and stuff like that. So it's an easy copy paste if you want to do it that way. But it's intentionally a generic tool. So it can kind of dovetail to whatever you happen to be using. But if you want to be more specific to a specific diagramming tool or a specific formatting language or whatever, you can certainly do that. And we've done instances where we basically, as part of the prompt engineering, or even with, you can do it with embedding too. You give it this is the language I want you to output this in. And then that it gives you a maybe JSON format or XML format or whatever the case may be. And then you can just import it into the tool. So that's one example of how you can do that. Obviously, a lot of tools now are coming up with ways to use generative AI natively. So in those cases, you have to kind of weigh the benefits, right? Which one is going to be more effective? If I write my own customized prompts, they're going to give me some specific user experience, or if I'm just going to use the native tools. So there's room for conversation there. But yeah, that's basically how that shakes out.
Yeah, I think we're running out of time, so let me just remind our audience that Sean will be speaker on our conference as well. Rainer and me will be speaking as well there, and you can use this coupon to get 20% off the ticket price. And I think we should finish our podcast today because we are running out of time.
Yes, but
Unfortunately.
let me really say chapeau, because what you have explained is super interesting, and I can't wait to continue with these discussions in the course of the BA day. So maybe we have other opportunities to talk to each other, and so I will now become an observer of your company and your developments and your steps forward, because it's super interesting. And I really would like to give you a big thank you that you have explained us and have found time to be in this session now with us.
Well, I thank you very much, both of you, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of this. If either of you or anybody who's been listening has any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, or my email address is Sean_Crawford at epam.com. So you can reach out to me there as well. Also, the tool we've been talking about throughout this, Alexander was nice enough to put a link in the description, so you can, if you check out that link, you can read a little bit about it and see it there. So thanks again. It was great. Really nice to meet both of you.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, and see you at our next podcast next week, I think, and during the conference. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. See you.
Bye.
Thanks
Good
very much, guys.
evening. Good day. Bye.